Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us on the 2025 Imposter Syndrome Awareness Day for this year. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Moona Ederveen. She is a board advisor and innovative tech influencer. And most recently, she served as an executive director in EMEA for financial services cybersecurity. A visiting for visiting international security conferences from age 16. She consulted at global banks and advised on cybersecurity and risk for nearly 2 decades. As a multilingual brand ambassador to financial services, other sectors, and government stakeholders, she's an avid builder of trusted communities. A strong advocate for cross-sector crisis preparedness and resilience, she also works to encourage the next generation of talent into tech careers. And I'm absolutely delighted to welcome her today. So, Moona, thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Lisa. It's great to be here.
So I'm going to kick off with my first question to you, Moona. Having started attending security conferences from the age of 16 and building such an impressive career, do you still experience imposter syndrome despite your amazing achievements?
Yeah, I absolutely do. And in fact, I think it was my imposter syndrome coming through that when you asked me initially, Muna, do you want to possibly join me on this podcast? That I was thinking, oh, I'm not so sure about that. Should I talk about this openly? But then you and I discussed it, and we discussed, it's actually good to talk about these things and tell others what we're going through. And you know what? I'll be completely honest with you. Today morning, I was nervous and I didn't want to get up. So that's something I sometimes do with my imposter syndrome. I want to hide in my bed. I sleep more. But over the years, I've learned to become kinder to myself. So I kind of know that this behavior is me gathering my strength to actually bravely face the challenges of the day. And then gradually, I get more into it. And I'm like, yeah, okay, I want to do this, and it's going to be fun. And I kind of reframe. So yeah, one of the reasons I was also nervous about doing this particular podcast is that I just recently started building my own business, and of course, a lot of these thinking patterns came up in terms of, oh, I can't do this, and I'll never manage to do this or that. And you know what? I've had these thoughts for so long, and I've known all throughout my life experience now that I've usually always managed in the end. So now I just tell myself that, and I just try to frame my nervousness as excitement, actually, because I actually love a challenge and I get bored very easily. So what I do now is I actively seek growth, I seek challenges, and I know that on some occasions I'll fail, but it'll be worth it because there's no growth in the comfort zone, right? So these days I also realize that I can just pivot and adjust if something doesn't work instead of overly worrying. I trust in my ability to just deal with the issues as they arise and basically learned to dial down my perfectionism, my fear of failure. But that said, I'm not going to lie to you, Lisa. Of course, I prefer success. Success is sweet. And where it matters, I'll always give my best. But, I also know that oftentimes good is good enough, and perfect is the enemy of good.
Yeah, absolutely. I can really relate and resonate with that so much, especially as you just mentioned the perfectionism as well. I was an absolute born perfectionist. Everything had to be so spot on and
Yeah.
perfect. And now, the more I've gone through my own, career, the more that I'm okay with good enough. Not bad, obviously, and failure, of course, none of us want to fail, as you said. But I think, trying to get away from that impossible, perfection that really,
Yeah.
drives me. That was, something that I could really resonate with. And as a
Mhm.
multilingual professional working across different cultures, how has imposter syndrome manifested differently, would you say, in various cultural contexts?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question. Thank you, Lisa. So, it is correct. I speak four languages fluently. I've lived in 3 countries. I've visited many others, and apart from those 4 languages, I actually have a decent understanding of another 2 languages. But I would say I don't speak any one of them perfectly. So yes, I do get nervous about, my accent or that what I'm saying is not perfect, how perfect I would want it to be. But over the years, I have actually learned to let go of that most of the time. And again, I have reframed it as a strength because not everybody speaks so many different languages. And now, I even push myself on occasion to be vulnerable in a language that I maybe feel less comfortable in if it will make my conversation partner more comfortable. So, for example, I left Germany over 20 years ago. My German is far from perfect, especially when it comes to business German. But if I speak to someone who is actually German and I know it'll make them more comfortable, then I'm happy to go that extra mile and just put myself in a position of vulnerability in order to let them have the best possible conversation experience. And I would actually say, further to that point, some people that you come across who have a different accent than yourself, so, us non-native speakers, we sometimes have to actually work harder to understand, to get across right. And for example, when I was in uni studying Dutch journalism in Dutch, those were defining moments. But people like me, we've had a journey to be where we are now. We may have taken risks. Some of us may have needed to be brave to speak from a position of sounding different. And in cases that may have even put us on the back foot. And, there is a colleague that I really admire, Monica Verma. She's the CISO at Booz Allen Hamilton, and she did a really beautiful post on this on LinkedIn recently. If you like, I'll send you the link and maybe you can share it.
Sure. Monica's amazing as well. I do follow her and her posts a lot on LinkedIn and social media. So, growing up in Germany and later working across Europe, how did cultural transitions affect your confidence levels, would you say?
Yeah, I think this is an interesting, follow on from the previous conversation. So I would say in some cases it's absolutely put me on the back foot where I, didn't know all the cultural references, whether that was in the Netherlands where I studied, whether that is in the UK. Um, but also sometimes I feel having had to move, cross country and all of that. It's made me braver in some areas. It's made me think faster, think on my feet. It's made me just be able to think outside the box more. And those are strengths that I really do value in myself and in others now. And of course, I had to practice being vulnerable so much that I actually find I mind it less now. And in fact, these days, I find that being vulnerable and open with people and showing the real me actually helps me forge deep and lasting connections. And that took a confidence for me, to find that willingness to show the real me. And I distinctly remember finding that confidence in my 30s.
Absolutely. For me, I'll be honest, I was heading up almost 50 when I found that confidence. I'm actually neurodivergent, so I know I communicate
Yeah.
in a very different way. And I also had
Mm.
those masks as well, where I was really reluctant to, be authentic, and I felt that I had to mask myself to fit into, a lot of different work and social situations. And for me, it was actually that I was heading up almost towards 50 by the time I realized that I really wanted to be my authentic self, neurodivergence and all. And it
Mm.
really paid off for me. So I absolutely understand that. So, as someone who speaks at major events like Gartner, how do you manage imposter syndrome before stepping out onto big stages in front of, in some cases, probably hundreds, if not thousands of people?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, like we saw, I sit here and I probably appear quite confident, but you should have seen me today morning, right? When I just didn't want to get up and face the day. So there is a bit of both, I guess, in me that yes, I do get nervous, and then sometimes I just pull myself together and I do it. And then I really enjoy it as well. But I think the being kind to yourself is important. Sometimes you just need that half hour longer to gather your strength. And also after a big, exertion like a Gartner presentation or a London keynote, you might need an extra day to rest. It comes with the territory. But I find that ultimately what I do to help myself is I like to reframe. Again, we talk about reframing, right? So I want to share my excitement about my topic with the audience. And I follow this piece of advice from Jane Franklin. She says, think less about yourself, think more about your listener. So it's not about, whether I stand there and I fail. It's more, what can I deliver to my audience? And, I will talk you through how this was quite an evolution for me, right? I wasn't born loving the stage. In fact, I remember in uni when we were first being taught to do presentations, I would say all of us, we were so nervous, we were like, my knees feel weak, my heart is racing. Can you guys not see that? My palms are sweating. But, they also told us that no, we can't see that. You guys look completely confident in front of the audience. So we practiced and we went out there and did the public speaking. And then eventually I even took acting lessons because felt I was still not confident enough. And now I really enjoy my public speaking. And in fact, I do love the high stakes nature of it. And yeah, I'm a bit of an adrenaline junkie that way.
Absolutely. And I totally get that as well, and relate to having that downtime before and after big events. It's so important to have that decompression time. I feel, and you can analyze your own performance as well in that time. That's something that I often do. So you work in an industry where overconfidence can be dangerous. Is there ever a positive side to imposter syndrome in cybersecurity?
So my answer might surprise you, but I would say, yeah, 100%. And that is one of the reasons that I support the UK's National Preparedness Commission, because it is, we're so aware of the risks we're facing, the threats, and how things can go wrong, that I would say my level of preparedness ranges even from trying to maintain, where possible, a level of fitness that, I can sprint for a little stretch, that I could ideally pull myself up, because I think it's so important. And we, we think about preparedness. A lot of us will have this image that we've seen on reality TV shows about preppers, right? So I wouldn't call myself a prepper like that, but have I taken steps to prepare for a potential emergency or crisis for my family and I? Yes, absolutely, I have. And, with the National Preparedness Commission, they've actually put out a report on, it's called The Elephant in the Room, which is about the potentially wide-ranging and devastating effects that we could see due to technology outages, right, in our interconnected world. And in fact, I have even written an article for them about, wicked problems and complex problems, and how our interconnected society can deal with those by preparing, becoming more resilient as citizens, organizations, and as a government.
Absolutely. And your role involves predicting and preventing cyber threats. So, do you think that this heightened awareness of potential risks affect how you view your own capabilities and limitations?
I would certainly think so. I mean, I always think we have to stay humble and acknowledge that there is so much we do not know. It's also about the unexpected things that happen. So those ripple effects, right? Things might happen here that then suddenly have an impact there. And it's something none of us could anticipate. But what I would say, we absolutely have to get better at anticipating and thinking outside of the box, and then trusting in our ability to deal with the unexpected, right? So you mentioned over preparation earlier as well as one of your earlier coping strategies. So have you found as well that once you learn to trust more in your ability to deal with things as they arise, it's actually freed you up to be more creative in your response, more nimble and agile in your response, which is so important when we're dealing with these complex and wicked problems that we're seeing in the cybersecurity space and, in fact, in many other areas in our lives now.
Absolutely. And this one I just love. So you say that you're a hobby chocolatier. Would you say that pursuing interests that are completely outside your professional domain has helped you to build confidence in unexpected ways? And I do want to try some of that chocolate at some point.
Absolutely, yes, we'll have to do that. So
Yeah.
the funny thing is, making chocolate, or the way I used to do them, so these filled, well, we would call them bonbons maybe, or pralines. It's actually quite tricky, so I had to really, it was quite the challenge for me to do those. And I loved, challenging myself outside of work because I just felt it helped my brain grow, it helped my skills grow. But I suppose an even better example would be, in terms of conquering your fears. I used to be very afraid of horses. Yeah, funny story, but true. So what did I do is I took horse riding lessons because I wanted to conquer that fear. And then, once you start being able to tell a large animal like a horse, what to do, it's actually quite a powerful feeling. And horse riding is also a lot about awareness. I feel it's even helped me being more aware of, let's say, conversation partners, etc.
Absolutely. And what impact would you say that remote work and virtual presenting has had on your experience with imposter syndrome?
That is such an interesting question. I mean, yeah, we had a very large portion of our professional lives during COVID. And that is, in fact, when I started public speaking more. And I would say that it helped me because I remember doing one of my first bigger presentations virtually, which was the NetWest Government Conference. And I was pleased that, as an over preparing person with potential imposter syndrome, I was pleased that I was able to just focus on the camera and maybe have a bit of a script there with me as well, as opposed to this sort of sensory overload that you get when you're presenting in a room full of people. Everybody stares at you. There's quite a bit that can go wrong in terms of, I don't know, strange noises, things falling over. And for me, being able to just focus on the camera initially was quite good. But as I built my confidence and I got better at public speaking, I now really do enjoy the energy in the room and the feedback you get from the audience because I do feel more confident in terms of being able to, maintain the audience engagement, their attention, but also to deal with any of those unforeseen moments that just happen.
Absolutely. And I can relate to that as well because I started doing a lot of public speaking during the pandemic. And it wasn't something that was really even on my radar until we were all suddenly forced to work remotely from home. And I started doing some of it just to fill up some of the extra time that I had during the pandemic. Found I really enjoyed it. But you're so right as well. There is that transition between the remote to being in the room with a lot of people who are looking at you. So I do completely get and understand that. Your background includes building PCs from scratch and writing software manuals. And how has hands-on technical experience affected your confidence when dealing with high-level strategic decisions?
Yeah, I think that is such an interesting question, Lisa. I mean, I think when it comes to certain aspects of problem solving or understanding the root cause of something that happened, the technical ability and the knowledge does really help. But I think strategic decision, depending on what it is about, is almost a distinct skill set to technical know-how. So, and I would say as it comes to strategy, I'm very much aware that also here I don't know everything. And I think, in fact, nobody knows everything about everything. But we can certainly learn to get better at these skills. However, as I said earlier, it is important we stay humble. It's important to acknowledge the limits of our capability. So again, what we do need to learn is we need to learn to anticipate better in our strategies. We need to learn and put processes in place that allow us to respond more nimbly and, in fact, be better prepared. And then when the proverbial hits the fan, we just have to trust in our resilience capabilities more.
Absolutely. And as an advisory board member for the London Cyber Resilience Centre, how do you balance being both a mentor and a learner while managing feelings of imposter syndrome?
Yeah, that is a good question, right? Again, people ask you, do you want to be my mentor or you want to mentor someone? And you're like, well, am I even in a position to do that? Who do I think I am, right? But I'll tell you a story about this, right? So early on in my career, I do remember very well, like I always told myself, if you can't say anything smart, shut up. And that is probably true, but only to a degree, right? So we have a point in our careers where, so I started working at a large German financial institution, right? And I found myself in this room with these people and very senior people, and they were actually listening to what I was saying. And I have to tell you, it was a great feeling, right? So them listening to my technical expertise and taking it on board. Wow. But then a couple of years later, I distinctly remember one of my managers said to me, Moona, you have to speak up more. You're too quiet, say what you think. And I remember thinking, but I don't have anything to say. I I just like, what would I even say? But what happened then is basically I forced myself to speak up more, right? And over the years, I became more opinionated. And in fact, now I sometimes find it hard to, stop talking. So then I have to remind myself that listening is just as important. There has to be balance, right, between the
Yeah.
talking and the listening. But one of the things I would advise the listeners or the viewers for today is make yourself speak up if it's important meeting because you don't want anybody to think that you're just there to take notes. Obviously, you're not going to say anything stupid, but once you get over your imposter syndrome, you'll probably find that you have something very valid to say because otherwise, why would you be in that room? So, take that space, own it, make sure they see you, they hear you, you're there for a reason, you have a right to be there and make that right heard. So, I think for me, it was quite a transition from thinking like, oh, I have nothing to say to I now love public speaking, I love being on stage, and when I mentor, people sort of, let's say the 16 plus career, and especially women, I always tell them, two things. First of all, you have to speak up for yourself, right? No one else is going to do that for you. And especially if they're women, I also let them know, do apply for that job, even if you don't have, let's say, 9 out of the 10 qualifications or skills required, because a guy would probably apply because they'll probably be facing less imposter syndrome than us. But not all women know this. So I always feel it's worth repeating that message, do apply if you think you can possibly do it, even if you don't fulfill all the criteria, and definitely speak up for yourself, when it comes to things like negotiating salary, promotions, etc. Nobody else is going to do it for you. So I encourage them to be brave and to just stand up for themselves. But, I've just said that about guys. I did have a really powerful experience once, and this was when I did my first video podcast actually. So we had this amazing interviewer who was so good with the questions, and I was like really in awe. So afterwards, we had the conversation, and he said to me, "You surely don't get imposter syndrome, right?" And I said, "Yeah, I do." And it turned out he did as well. So we bonded over that because we admired each other's performance in this interview process, and it we'd never in a million years thought that either of us would get imposter syndrome, and it turns out we both did.
And it's exactly why I co-founded this awareness day with my two colleagues who I run the day with to open up that conversation. And like you just said, you bonded with that person because you found out you both had imposter syndrome. But I think people are a bit nervous about admitting it or saying that they have those feelings of being an imposter. So that's why this day exists, and it's amazing to be able to finish up on that note because it's a really good message for this year's Imposter Syndrome Awareness Day. Just before we wrap up, Moona, how can people get in touch with you if they'd like to find out more or invite you to speak at their event? Which, by the way, I can absolutely endorse Moona. She's an excellent speaker panelist if you want to book her for your event. But it'd be great so that people could know how they could get in touch with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've got my LinkedIn, Moona Ederveen-Schneider, and people can find me there. I'm quite active in the cybersecurity and risk and preparedness space. So I love a ping on there, or yeah, maybe just an email. And I would also say, just to echo, we keep we keep learning and growing, right? People might look at me now and say, "Oh, yeah, so she likes to speak on the public stage. Wonderful." But what's next? My next hurdle is actually going to be I want to take an improv class because one of the things I'm still always nervous about is saying something stupid. But I think, embracing that vulnerability of, yes, I might embarrass myself and I might embarrass myself lots, but it'll be so liberating. And I think just, as a closing statement, I would advise those who have listened so far, yeah, sometimes you have to fake it till you make it. And as I alluded to at the very beginning of the interview, feel the fear and do it anyway.
Absolutely. A book I've read by Susan Jeffers many times over the years. So absolutely. If anybody listening, if you've not read Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway, highly recommend that you get hold of a copy. Moona, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you for this year's Imposter Syndrome Awareness Day. Thank you for being with me. And to everyone that's listening, we do have other events and other Q&As and things going on throughout the day. So do keep checking our website and the social media channels and LinkedIn for Imposter Syndrome Awareness Day. And we look forward to welcoming you to other events throughout the day and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa.